Welcome to the Montgomery County Department of Permitting Services podcast. I'm Gail Lucas, your host. I'm also the Division Chief for the Customer Support and Outreach Division here at DPS. Joining us on the podcast today is one of the newest members of the DPS team, John Catlett. Welcome, John. John is the Division Chief for Commercial Building. And you started, 2 months ago, 3 months ago?
It's actually been 4 months ago.
4 months.
Time flies when you're having fun.
It does. Thank you for joining us today on the podcast. We're going to introduce you to our viewers and our listeners and talk a little bit about what you do and where you see the division of commercial building going. All right. Before we dive into all of that, though, let's get a little bit of background about you. What my listeners should know is that John is a consummate storyteller. He has 1,000 stories. So, John, tell us a little bit about your background and what brought you to Montgomery County.
Well, I appreciate that. Actually, my background is where my stories come from. I started off in 1978 as a volunteer firefighter at the age of 16 and have been in public service ever since. I spent some time as a career firefighter paramedic. I had great opportunities to be mentored by some really great people. Between a combination of working that in a part-time mode and ultimately becoming a building official. I was the youngest one in Virginia, by the way, at the age of 29. Anyway, at that point, I had a career that spanned Winchester, Williamsburg, and then I retired as the director of code administration in Alexandria, Virginia, for a long time. In that role, we were a department within a department. We were part of the fire department as well as part of the city manager's team. And so I had two bosses for a while, but during that time I helped lead the charge to get us into an enterprise fund, for number one. And number two was we actually separated into a separate department so our focus could be on things like permitting and processing and above.
Providing excellent customer service is what we are striving to achieve here at DPS. And it sounds like you have some experience there. Tell us your customer service philosophy. Tell us about that.
Well, my customer service philosophy came through spending lots of time trying to figure out how to be a better leader and less of a manager. And part of the philosophy with that is I developed a catchphrase, and I've kept it ever since, is let's rule out yes before we say no. And it takes a while. It really does. In an environment and in a jurisdiction as large as this, it's very difficult to try to figure out how you can facilitate customers when there's so much activity that comes through.
Sure.
But part of the answer to me is you develop leadership at all levels in the organization. You allow people to be empowered to make some decisions that help facilitate people along. And that takes time. If it's something that's not been there in the past, or if it's been a situation where that's not been the philosophy, you have to basically educate people and bring them up to that. So that's number one, is rule out yes before no. There are times we have to say no, but look at all your resources. Spend some time looking at things outside of the code. There's lots of articles, documents, teaching guides, whatever you want to grab a hold of. Look and see what other opinions are. And I guess my last piece on that would be, I am a believer that a lot of times you have to look outside your own boundaries. And what I mean by that is both personally and as a department, but then look to see what others have done. I have gotten some credit, which it really was teams in the past that I'd worked with on changing some processes and getting things to move more freer and a much more customer-centric philosophy. But it's not because I was some great mind. It's because I knew people and I knew where to ask, and I
Okay.
was reading things and looking. So that's what we've got to do. We got to look outside our boundaries and see where we should benchmark with the remaining of the communities in the area.
And when you say looking outside our boundaries, you mean looking at other jurisdictions, looking at other permitting offices? Is that what you're talking
Yes,
about?
yes, and in fact, in Alexandria, we spent a great deal of time actually making visits when we decided to do a permit center. Um, we visited several, not even in we went out of state even, just
Okay.
because we wanted the best model.
Right.
And that best model wasn't going to come from just our minds and thinking about how we've always done it. We got to look and see how other people have done it and why they're successful.
Sure. Building safety, sustainability, accessibility, that's one of the top priorities or several of the top priorities here at DPS. Tell
hmm
us about your team and their role when it comes to ensuring that commercial buildings are safe and sustainable.
Well, of course, the county has had several initiatives, and as part of that, we have adopted a, I won't call it more stringent, but a little bit deeper dive code, which is the ASTM 90.1 as our energy standard. And
Okay.
so this one goes a little bit farther than what people are used to with the ICC energy code. Um, they're both very similar, but at the same time, the ICC code is always like a cycle behind of where 90.1 is. So we're kind of on the forefront and the cutting edge when it comes to meeting those requirements. Um, I think our team, the biggest thing for us is training, constantly being able to be trained in what the new provisions are, being able to be able to say why they're there. You know, it's one thing to be able to say, yeah, we have a new code and here's the requirements, but why? How did it get there? Why are we doing it? And so I think that's a big piece of it, and it's education of our customers and our client base. So I think for us, our role with inspectors in the field, coordination with other divisions within DPS, sometimes even having to coordinate outside when it comes to restaurants and some other areas. I think that for the most part, I've seen that coordination works pretty well. The inspection process works
Okay.
wonderfully.
Good. What changes do you think are coming down in the code? As you know, DPS just went through a big code cycle. We updated our codes, and it's a short cycle. Our director has talked about it being a short cycle because we're going to be looking at the upcoming codes again very shortly. What changes should people be anticipating coming forward?
Well, in our recent code adoption in the 2021, there were some enhancements on mass timber. For those who don't know what I'm speaking of, mass timber is not standard 2x4s and
Right.
2x10s. It
Right.
is mass elements that now can be put into buildings up to 20 stories tall, and that's by code.
Okay.
And that, when it comes to a greener environment, carbon reduction, and so forth, mass timber is something to really consider. The other thing I would say that's coming down the pipeline is I think there's going to be, especially coming up in the 24 codes, there are going to be some simplifications on the national level on several areas, things like calculating height and area, those kinds of things. Um, I think that we're going to see that the code has now finally kind of reached its max when it comes to what it can ask for,
Okay.
with a few exceptions. But then at the same time now, I think a lot of people are looking at, well, how do we make it easier to use? And so I'm
Absolutely.
hoping that that's what we're going to start seeing in the next few code cycles.
Absolutely. Multifamily housing and four-story townhouses fall under the commercial code, even though most of us think of them and the people that live in them think of them as residential units or residential
Yeah.
dwelling units.
hmm
What should homeowners know about this difference? We treat them as commercial, they think of them as residential. What should folks know about that? Why is that important for them to understand?
there's several basic thoughts in the codes themselves. Number one, most single family homes or one or two family dwellings and even townhouses under 3 stories are allowed to be built under a residential code, an
Right.
international residential code. The issue is once you get above 3 stories, like in townhomes, or
Yeah.
if you start building outside of what the international residential code is designed for, it actually is almost like a construction document. If you were to
Okay.
take it, not know much about construction, you almost can pull the requirements out of there and say, well, I know how many nails I got to put here,
Okay.
how far I can take this 2 by 10.
Right.
The commercial codes are different, and that's because once we start getting above 3 stories, we start getting into different loading requirements on a building, structural requirements. There's far different fire protection requirements. For example, in a single family home, you can use a 13D sprinkler system. In a 4-story townhouse, has to be a 13R. And the biggest difference is it has a little bit more of a calculation element and a little bit more of a water supply issue
Okay.
because the
Okay.
buildings are bigger.
Right.
So that's why we see that break. And in our in the I'm terrible. I always refer to things by their code delineation, but on R2, which is like an apartment building, you have rated corridors. You have areas that you have to have fire sprinklers that are to the commercial codes, and so therefore that's why I think that there is that subtle difference, especially in the townhomes.
Mm-hmm.
But all in all, it's because there is some pretty substantial difference in how these buildings get put together.
And that's important for folks to know. We get that question often. Another question that we frequently get is just how do I get through this process as quickly as possible? How do I get my plans approved? We talk a lot about submitting for permits and when you need a permit and when you don't need a permit. But once that permit hits the door, how do I get through it and get to my project as quickly as possible?
Well, even before you submit your permit, especially on commercial projects,
Right.
there is and I'm drawing a blank on the name of it, but we have a process where
Pre-design
pre-design, that's it.
consultation.
And that basically gets you access to all the departments and all the players necessary that can give you information of what you need to make sure it comes in with your permit. It is a complicated process when you get to the commercial side because there are a
Sure.
lot more things that you have to consider. Structural design changes, and sometimes that requires calculations and so forth that you may not need in residential. So I would always say that if when in doubt and you have a question, call one of us up in a commercial division, including
Okay.
myself, and you're always, what things do I want to make sure I don't get caught on or
Right.
get
Right.
caught up in? And we'll try to give you that answer as best we can. I think for most people, they need to understand is I've used the term, we are not Mayberry. And Mayberry is, the one traffic signal town that gets 10 permits a month. We get, Gail, you could probably say better than me, but we get, tens of
Hundreds.
tens,
Right.
yeah, permits a day. And, the problem that people have to understand is every time someone thinks that they're long in the process, we have some clocks and windows that we have established for timeframes, which are expectations. When those things fall outside those expectations, which is the 22 working days once the plan reviewers get it and those types of things, I would expect a call. I would want somebody to say, "Hey,
Sure.
what happened? Maybe
Sure.
something
Sure.
didn't get right in the system."
Uh-huh.
And the system could be that we either have missed something or for some reason or another due to time off or sicknesses or things like that, we've been short-staffed. And we don't have a great way of being able to communicate that right now. I'm hoping that at some point we'll have more of a daily monitor of where things are
Okay.
that can be on the website.
How often do you go out in the field, John? How often? I know that you are engaging with customers daily since you started. You hit the ground running. Customers I know are reaching out to you even this early in your tenure. But how often are you out in the field? How often are you looking at what staff is looking at, what your inspectors are looking at, what the plan reviewers have reviewed?
Um, my philosophy is you can't do it all from behind a desk,
Right.
and there are times where you need to be out in the field. That's a little different philosophy than I believe that might have been in this position previously. And I'm not saying that's wrong or right. I'm just saying my philosophy is I can only imagine so much of what your problem is until I actually go see it.
Sure.
And then basically we try to pull in our team members whenever possible. And if we've made a mistake or we think there's something that we could help move you through whatever that step is, we're going to use it as a learning moment. And there is no human process that is a perfect process. And we are going to have differences of opinion. We're going to have differences of opinions between inspectors. Training and carrying down a philosophy of customer first whenever possible. Hopefully that will start getting better. But I do believe, again, we're not Mayberry. And so it does, to keep
I like
things
that.
rolling for everyone, we got to keep things, kind of to as structured as possible so that we don't get folks hung up trying to figure out solutions that maybe they're not comfortable figuring out. So that's my role. And my
Right.
role is to help try to figure those things out.
You talked a little bit about performance expectations, timing of when plans get to plan reviewers. We know, and our listeners, our regular listeners and viewers know that we have dashboards that are on our website that help us understand, help the customer understand how long something is taking. How do you think that should be used? How do you think our dashboard should be used? I'm the customer. Tell me the best way to use our dashboard to help me get through the process.
Well, of course, if you have something in process and you check the dashboard, a couple, three times a week while you're in that 30-day time frame that we try to shoot for on
Sure.
our mid-sized and large projects, you can kind of see if we're getting a little delayed or not. The dashboard kind of will give you an idea of what percentages we're hitting. Um, we are hoping at some point to also have another dashboard area that tells you how many permits have been received and how many are still in
Right.
the queue.
Right.
Because I think if the constructing public and our customers get an understanding that we're not just dealing with those 5 to 10
Sure.
permit applications,
Right.
they may have a little better understanding of why it takes a little longer. But at the same time, one of the things we are going to try to work to reduce is the number of times we return drawings, the number of times that you get rejected.
Sure.
Um, we're going to put in place that after something comes in twice, the plan reviewer needs to set up a meeting with the design team and work and make sure they understand the comments and concerns. So I think some of those things will help us put things back online and we don't get to these points where we have these back and forths that are basically nothing more than just the plan submittal going back with some written comments.
What else can customers do to make sure that they're getting the information that they need, that they're supplying to DPS the information that DPS needs? What else can they do?
Well, on our website, we do have some pretty good per process type things that you need to make sure you submit. But the other thing I would highly recommend, if you have a complicated project or a large project, and there's going to probably be some differings of opinion of how you've
Sure.
applied the code,
Sure.
call myself or call one of the managers. We have Crystal. She's over top of the fire protection plan review section and also the life safety and architectural. Alex is over the engineering side and our field inspectors, our special or critical structures program, which is the things where are elements that typically you don't find in a local building department they can inspect. Those are the things where you're required to have an external source. Those types of things, do that planning early on. Make sure that you're having a conversation with our team. Request a team meeting with us.
Sure.
If it's a
Sure.
big project, we don't have that on the website yet, but that's coming. And those types of things, anything we can do to talk through it up front, I think will help make the process go better. as you go through.
Communicate.
Amen.
We are here
Amen.
to make sure that you understand what you need to do. So what
hmm
else? What else have I not asked you about, or what else do you want to share with our listeners about getting through the commercial process, or just about this commercial division that you're now in charge of? Is there anything else you want to talk about with that?
I would just say that I have been blessed to come here, especially in my late stage, and after every time I said I was going to retire, I didn't. We have some of the best professionals, I think, in the industry, and I mean that. We have some of the most highly recommended engineers in our structural side. We have a staff of people that are very technically qualified. And what we want to do now is marry that with the customer service piece
Sure,
as well,
sure.
and trying to, through education, more training, and those types of things, for us to learn where we have a little more flexibility. And that's a difficult thing to do, especially when you're getting 10 or 15 requests a day for, well,
Absolutely.
how can
Absolutely.
you give on this, or how can you do that? Well, the code's a code, but there are sometimes 10 ways to build a mousetrap. So, using experience and things like that is what we want to try to bring into a more human process, I guess would be the right answer. The other thing is we are looking at various programs. That it's in the very early stages, but one of the things I'm hoping that we will ultimately fund and take care of is going to be a pre-application review process, where when you're in a long-term planning process trying to get a project approved, that like at 90% or something like that, your plans could come in. It would be a fee. It would, definitely have to be something where you understand that once that's approved, we have to go back and make sure the plans are the same and all. So it wouldn't remove, an after permit application process, but hopefully it would expedite it along really quickly. And I have had experience with that in other jurisdictions, and be truthful with you, it was very successful. It helped a lot.
Well, good.
We, yeah, and I think the only other thing I would just add just before going is be patient with us. Just like with any place, we're going through growing pains too. And if you got a concern, feel free to jump out there and hit me up. My number's on the webpage.
As is all of DPS staff. So we are
Yep,
available to folks if you have questions or if you need help.
absolutely.
Thank you, John, for joining us on the podcast today. And to our listeners, to our viewers, remember, DPS is here to help you, our customer, succeed. It's important to know when to get a permit. It's important to know when you don't need a permit. It's also important to know who you can reach out to get help if you get stuck, or if you just want to make sure that you're doing everything that you need to do correctly. If you have any questions about the permitting process, you can reach out to our customer service team at MC 311, just dial 311, or 240-777-0311, or stop by our offices. DPS is open with folks in the office to help you. We're at 2425 Reedy Drive on the 7th floor. We're open Monday through Friday from 7:30 a.m. to 4 o'clock p.m. And you don't ever need an appointment. And we have folks in the office that can walk you through the process, can answer your questions, and make sure that you get on the right track. Again, John, thank you for joining us on the podcast today. And thank you, listeners, for tuning in. Please check out the Montgomery County Department of Permitting Services website, montgomerycountymd.gov/DPS, to find information and resources to help you with your next project. Do you have an idea or a suggestion for our podcast? Please let us know. We're interested in making sure that this podcast is relevant to you and speaks to the issues that you want to hear about. Email your ideas and questions to dps.podcast@montgomerycountymd.gov. And if you found this podcast helpful, please subscribe and tell your friends and your family to subscribe so that you're always up on our latest episode. I'm Gail Lucas. Remember, DPS is your project partner.
This podcast is brought to you by County Cable Montgomery, your source for news and information from the Montgomery County government. Connect with us via cable, Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube by searching for County Cable MoCo.